We're close to somewhere to eat, aren't we?
There's a cafeteria here, so. Cafeteria.
You want to take an hour or 45? We're going to break for 45 minutes for lunch. Where's my pen? I think we left off item 7, reports, informational. A big game release plan for 2010 and 2011. I think Mike Cox is up.
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Mike Cox, Big Game Staff Biologist for Nevada Department of Wildlife. Everyone should have received our Big Game Release Plan for fiscal years 2010 and 2011. I can go into detail or skim over, and if there's particular questions, we can jump into those. However you want me to lead off, I'll take whatever suggestions you have.
Why don't you start?
Well, we'll go to page 2. Page 1 is what we accomplished last couple years, but we'll just go into what we propose for the next couple years. We've got listed desert bighorn, California bighorn, Rocky Mountain bighorn, and some pronghorn. Desert bighorn, those are all augmentations. And again, if you wanted me to get into details on any one of those, let me know.
I have a question on all of these. Do you tell us where you're getting them from? Importing, where you're getting them from?
No, we historically with this plan, we haven't identified that. We're certainly thinking about it. And for example, California bighorn, we, up until about 10 years ago, relied heavily on state of Oregon and Idaho for California bighorn. We would identify our release and what our interests are in terms of reestablishing a herd somewhere, but we were always at the mercy of source stock. And at that time, it was those states, or even earlier, we were going to British Columbia. Now that we have well-established, 1,800, pushing 2,000 California bighorn in the state, we're pretty much able to do ourselves our captures and transplants for California bighorn. Occasionally, there might be Oregon saying, "Hey, we've got some excess California. You want to come and get it?" And they've been doing that with other states over the last few years. But so we'll start looking at source stocks a year or two before, populations that are doing well, populations that are nearing carrying capacity, and then populations that have similar habitat, climate, terrain characteristics as our release site. And we try to keep options so that maybe there's 3 or 4 those source stocks that we would prefer, and we just wait until the information comes back from survey or whatever that those populations can afford a capture complement to be removed.
Like in desert, you've got 220 sheep you're going to augment. Do you have that many? You're going to catch them. Do we have that many extra sheep somewhere to transfer?
Well, we've got now, today, probably over 7,000 desert bighorn. That probably equates to 2,500 to 3,000 ewes. And in fact, we've got 15 populations over 150 and 20 populations over 150 and 15 different desert bighorn populations over 200. So we definitely have the animals, and again, it's just a matter of matching them up. And we do have density issues. I'd like to maybe this winter come back and make a separate presentation on kind of our overall thoughts on our mostly desert bighorn, but certainly include the other subspecies in terms of how many we think we can manage in a particular mountain range with existing waters, existing winter range. Talk about some of our populations we're concerned about that are nearing carrying capacity or possibly that have reached or maybe even over what we would consider a reasonable carrying capacity, densities, number of animals on water in the summer. Some of our winter ranges are fairly limited. So we do have those source stocks that we're looking at, and certainly those will be the first ones we may grab sheep from where we've got density concerns. And then hopefully I'll bring up that dirty word of U-hunts this winter too and talk about how we want to use both captures and potential harvest, both as management tools, depending on our opportunities that we have. We certainly want to use as many animals as source stock as possible, absolutely. There's still a lot of potential habitats that have no sheep in them now, and but there may be a situation that maybe an area a source stock has some disease concerns, and maybe we don't want to spread that disease, and it's not a viable source population, and maybe that might be a candidate for a U-hunt if neither us nor another state wants to accept those animals. So we just want to keep our options open, but our source populations, our biggest decision on where we're going to go is from a lot of our surveys, most recent surveys. And for like deserts, we're doing surveys right now. And we'll take that information, sit down with our regions and see who's got what, who's got concerns on densities, and take a look at our release plan and see what we can match up. And again, it's a 2-year plan. Not all of these do we have any desires to accomplish in 1 year. And it's costly, so we have to live within our means in terms of capture costs and whatnot. So,
No deer?
no deer. I'll maybe explain why there's no deer and why there's no elk. And was there a question?
Chairman Lynn?
Commissioner Macbeth?
Mike, the River Mountains is not a herd that is hunted. It's out between Las Vegas and Boulder City for everybody who doesn't know. But how many sheep does that produce, for our transplant program? How many come out of the River Mountain herd?
Well, there's someone behind me that probably knows better, but I came down to a fraternity meeting last year or 2 years ago, and I did an interesting query of which mountain range has provided us the largest amount of source stock. And it probably wasn't a surprise to some that the rivers had, but a ton. I mean, I think, it's been like we've released about 1,800 deserts into Nevada throughout our history by ourselves. We've never taken anyone else's deserts. They're all inferior compared to Nevada's deserts, so we wouldn't want to take anybody else's. And I suspect we're, what, 500-600? About 700 sheep have been removed from the rivers throughout the history of our captures for source stock. So it's been a very, very productive herd and good genetics. And so, yeah.
How many sheep per year? I mean, what kind of production do you get out of the rivers? I mean, how much of this 200 are potentially going to be satisfied out of the River Mountain herd?
Well, that population is, what, about 250, 300?
There's about 210 to 220 adult animals is the estimate. We've taken 105 using lambs primarily. There's been some rams since 2005. Currently, we have what can be considered a very high ram ratio. So if we continue to take some using lambs out, we're going to have to maybe come back in late December and consider taking some class 3 and class 4 rams.
That's Pat Cummings, our field biologist for southern Nevada. But, you know, we've been probably grabbing anywhere from 20 to 30 ewes, say 3 out of 5 years, 4 out of 5 years from the rivers. And, you know, we've had some really poor lamb production in past years, but in the recent years, the population has been building. So we'll definitely continue to use it as source stock. The ram ratio is another matter. Mule deer. Mule deer, obviously we all know they're a little different than bighorn, but there's a lot of similarities too. When you have vacant habitat that has none of your species of interest in it, but yet the habitat itself is accommodating that species, then it's a pretty easy explanation cell that reintroducing that animal, everything being equal, you're going to have a population establish themselves. And that's what we have with bighorn sheep, and to a certain extent pronghorn. We've got areas historically that had those animals, then they were extirpated for lots of different reasons, and they never did fill back in, or there wasn't a population close enough or animals close enough to fill back in. And so that's kind of, in general, the conditions under which we have been successful in reducing bighorn sheep into the state. We have a lot of good bighorn habitat, but they were extirpated. I mean, completely none left. No core population at all. Mule deer, you know, at least since European man came over, we had mule deer wherever there was habitat, and there hasn't been any extirpations of those. Obviously, we've got some major declines in some of our deer herds, depending on where you're at, but they're there. And if there's a population there, then that population is living within their means, living within their habitats that they have, and all the other mortality factors that they deal with on a daily basis. So to use a trap and transplant, capture transplant, to restore mule deer, you have to have good habitat first. And so whatever the deer herd is out there, those animals have increased or decreased up into accommodate that habitat. Now we've done some captures in the past. They've been due to nuisance and depredation causes, and along with, well, I know Arizona had done it, Utah has done it, and there's probably several other western states that have made an attempt to capture and transplant. I mean, transfer deer hundreds of miles or a sizable distance from where they were captured, And I can't recall any successes from those. And we've, along with that, right now, whether we wanted to do it or not, we've talked about it. I'll give you an example. Esmeralda County, Commissioner Wallace may be familiar with the Palmettos, the Magruders, and there's some country in there that has some potential. It's got a low-density deer herd. What if we were to build some water developments? What if we were to open up some of that summer habitat at 8,000 feet and get rid of some of that PJ? If those habitat actions were taken, summer range increased, plenty of winter range, water developments built, well then I think we've just increased that carrying capacity for those deer, and maybe we don't want to wait 20 years for that deer herd to build. Could that be an example of where we could possibly, transplant some deer? We could, but one of the other problems we have, well, sometimes our sheep don't read the script that we write for this release plan. Deer are even less inclined to do that, and it's amazing the amount of distance they will travel. We always have a core of ewes, bighorn ewes, that will establish where we want them. And we always get some rogues that travel around, figure out that there's no better habitat, and they come back. But us and a lot of the other western states, mule deer do a lot of traveling because it's all mule deer habitat, and they could potentially beat you back to where you captured them from. So that would be an extreme situation where we might consider it. But right now, even if we wanted to or could, we have, because of chronic wasting disease, a moratorium on moving cervids within state or across state lines. That's my kind of basic explanation of why you don't see mule deer and haven't on the release plan, because of their nature, their habitat demands and needs, and their current distribution throughout the state.
How about for genetic mixing, like you do sheep?
It's been brought up. We haven't really done much for mixing sheep. There's definitely other states that do that with genetics in mind. They might consider they have a bottleneck because the source population was a very small, was a single population, and we haven't really seen any deleterious effects on our bighorn herds, that their lack of genetic diversity. But we all know that we've got certain deer herds that have certain genetic makeup. I'll grant you that. Area 22 and Area 23 and Area 24 are pretty good. We haven't, as biologists, I guess, discussed playing God in that arena of taking those genetics and sprinkling them. It just hasn't come up. Back to the release plan. Looking at the desert bighorn, I'm gonna single out Mount Grafton. It's a population that we tried to establish back in the late 80s, early 90s. We weren't successful. There may be some things that we didn't do right then that we might be able to do better now. It was a rocky population that we tried to establish. Since then, our statewide Bighorn Sheep Management Plan came out, and we wrangled long and hard on where to tell ourselves where to put deserts, where to put California, and where to put Rockies. And we actually decided along a line that would actually put the south end of the Shell Creeks into our desert bighorn release area. And some of those decisions actually were based on the facts that were presented to us and pretty much the scientific literature provided by John Wayhouse and Rob Ramey that the entire Great Basin was desert bighorn sheep, from the Snake River Plains to the Colorado River. There was clines of sheep living at different elevations and habitats. So with that in mind, we wanted to give as much future potential to restore desert bighorn sheep. They're the fewest in number of bighorn in the United States. But we still wanted to recognize, we've got great populations of California and Rockies. And we're still going to, do our best to expand those subspecies. But so we've got it on the list. We still have some issues or hurdles we have to deal with on Mount Grafton. And you'll see there's a few others that we've put these out there. But some of them have some management actions that have to be taken before we would do the transplant. The other thing I'd like to do maybe at a separate meeting, because it'll take some time, is to get into what we call our bighorn sheep matrix and what our biologists have provided for input on potential habitats and how we're looking at that list constantly of where do we have potential for bighorn habitat, but at the same time we have the limiting factors that there's risks involved that we would have to accommodate and deal with and manage before we would actually put the sheep in. But that we're continually looking at that, looking at our best shot, the areas that we think we have the best potential for bighorn to establish and hunters to have access to them someday in the future. Questions on the deserts?
Commissioner Howe?
This Mount Grafton, it's been tried before, and I noticed in the comments here that you're going to do some after the augmentation, you're going to do some predator control after the augmentation. Why wouldn't you do it beforehand? Give them a better chance.
Well, maybe the day after they're released is post.
I'm talking about maybe a month or so ahead of time.
Well, what happens, depending on when we put them in, is you might be wasting your time because we know that there's deer and elk herds. We know there's mountain lions living on Grafton right now. You might as well let the sheep tell you where they're going to live and where they're going to set up shop. If you were to kill, a lion now, you're probably going to have lions filling in within a month or two right after they're removed. And it may be on the south end of the mountain where the sheep, they decided to go to the north end. And spatially, you may have wasted some money. So I would rather see us watch where the sheep start setting up their home range and then take action on removing some offending animals in that area and try to get the biggest bang for our buck.
Commissioner Rain?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could I
sorry.
finish my thought, please?
I didn't know you weren't finished.
Excuse me. It just seems to me that you're going to, if you already know there's a lot of lions up there, they can travel a long ways too. I wouldn't want to sacrifice, you're only putting 30 in there. If there's a lot of lions up there, it ain't going to take them very long.
Well, that's why I said, I mean, you're going to constantly have influx of lions, no matter what you do. If you kill one Monday, you're going to have something Friday. I'd rather know where those sheep are going to establish first.
Let's start 6 months ahead of time then.
We'll take that under advisement.
Thank you.
You bet.
Commissioner Ray.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Several different questions here. One thing I don't see much of on any of these is issues with landowner or other land user conflicts. To what degree have those been addressed in any of these projects? Because there's bound to be other land users in many of these project areas.
Well, our individual biologists are the ones who are submitting this plan, and they obviously know the local use of those areas. So, I mean, we can take examples or whatever, but I know they've taken that into advisement. We have, this year, we submitted this and mailed it out, this plan, to all the major livestock organizations and to all the land management agencies who the land management agencies managing, you know, the dispersed recreation or permitted use. But really, when I think about all the sheep releases that we've done, never had anyone put out, never had anyone kicked off, never had anyone complain that they saw a bighorn sheep while they were out there doing whatever they were doing, whether it was cutting hay, riding a motorcycle, or whatever.
We've had people come to our meetings and state that they've been removed from the land by this agency, so we need for transplants of various animals. We've had that within this year, in fact. But that's almost a separate thing. But we should, there should be some evaluation where you do look at that and do speak to these people, have some form of outreach to see if there are any conflicts that are going to happen. And looking at this, I don't see that. Other things, costs.
We're here today. We're here today for those inputs.
Okay. Well,
We are at the county game boards for those inputs. That's our public process. Now, on top of that, the BLM and the forest has NEPA. They have a public process people can comment on. So,
but there's a relatively limited number of people generally in each one of these areas that one could contact and see what issues there are. I mean, it's hard to say without going out, and I would assume that would be a portion of the biologist's job to go out and go to these individuals. Some of these areas might not have very much private land, if any, but that would make it very simple. Those that do have a lot might be a little more, but I would think that would be a portion of the site planning and approval process, and I just didn't see that in here. Also, I don't see anything where it discusses costs associated with this plan. You know, what the budgetary requirements are to do all these transplants versus what is available. How is that going to be addressed?
we live within our means. We have funding that we either use from internal pots of money, federal aid, heritage, or we secure donations to help defray the costs.
I would just think that would be a portion of each project is potential costs. Also, I've talked before, it's been more than a year ago, about the time of the year which transplants take place, and seem to be some differing opinions whether or not fall transplants are better, spring, summer transplants are better. you know, and seem to come with a lot of fall transplants. You know, winter kill happens more frequently. I've heard that from different biologists in the department rather than summer ones, but it seems like we do most of the transplants in the fall. Where are these in a timeline relation to the time of the year? We plan on trapping in the fall, planting in the fall, or what are we doing?
Depends on the capture method. You know, if historically, we did drop nets in the summer, use water as bait. So we'd have a capture in July and August. If we're net gunning, you're asking these animals to run continuous 100-yard dashes on the landscape, and even though they're good at it, after about 10 of them, we'd probably collapse and die. So we have to be cognizant of the heat. So if we're using aerial net gun captures, we want to get that temperature, that air temperature down where we're not going to be seeing a lot of stress on the animals.
So is there science that states that fall is better than that, and one method is better than another for the survival of the animals? Which one's more cost effective, you know, per animal for the transplants? What is the science behind that? What has been shown to be more effective? For
Well, I think it's
survival
more
of the
art
species?
and then instead of science that we've all learned throughout the West, the capture methods. But just like I said, cooler temperatures would accommodate a net gun capture. And if we're wanting to do a drop net, then we'd have to do it when the water is the most limiting factor.
I guess that's one thing. I looked at this plan and none of that's discussed on methods or timing or.
It's a release plan. It's just a release plan. So.
Okay. Commissioner Capurro?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One thing that concerns me, and I'm very familiar with the Virginia mountains, I have a relative who ranches out there, and I know that herd's been augmented, I believe, 3 times. There is a lion problem out there. You know, I don't know whether anybody wants to recognize it or not, but I myself have run into 3 lions out there. So, and I believe there's been about 7 taken in a fairly short period of time. What I don't want to do with these animals is provide meals for lions. That's what concerns me about 2 things with regard to the time of year of the releases and the looking at the predator issue as it regards the specific area. And by that I mean that I want to give those herds or those augmentation releases or reintroductions for that matter an opportunity to familiarize themselves with the territory. Lions are real familiar with it, and so that's where your largest kill time is in that first year until they become acclimated as to where they are and the like. So it seems to me like in some of these situations, you might want to do some predator control ahead of time. And like I said, I know of some areas where there are lion problems. The other question I have is, you know, you've augmented last year, you put 75 desert bighorn sheep in the Delamars. Your release plan calls for another 50 to go in there. What is the reason for that? Have you had a predator problem in that area, or is there a change in the habitat since you released in '08? It just seems to me like there's got to be an explanation as to why you've got to augment that soon after you had an augmentation in just a year ago. The last question I have is on the reintroduction of the Rocky Mountain bighorns into the Coshita Mountains, where are you going to get those animals from?
Mr. Chairman, may I address the Commission?
Go ahead, Mark.
Mark Atkinson, Chief of Game, for the record. I wonder if I could just possibly try and answer Commissioner Rain's question, one pertaining to what has been determined to be the safest and most effective capture techniques for bighorn sheep have in fact been determined, and there was quite a significant amount of work that was done in Nevada back in the early 80s. There were a number of researchers, but one of them, Dr. Michael Koch, did a series of peer-reviewed papers on looking at the impacts of different capture techniques on the physiology, well-being, and stress of bighorn sheep. And it's been determined that net gunning at the right time of the year is the least stressful technique for handling sheep. I can provide you with that series of papers if you'd be interested in that. Another thing just on timing, I think as Mike mentioned, it's really important that we take into account the impacts of environmental temperature on these animals when we're catching them, because it does have a significant impact on their long-term survival based on capture. The other thing is that we have to be cognizant of the stage of gestation that they're at, and if we leave it too late, if we're waiting for that cold weather and we leave it too late, we're starting to push quite far into their gestation period, and then the chances for a failed pregnancy or an abortion are elevated. So we kind of have a safe period that we look at, and that involves a number of different things: the body condition of the animals, the ambient temperature, the pregnancy status of the females. So those all looked into, and just one thing that we haven't really addressed in any detail is that we're very conscious of disease issues and what the impacts are of translocating animals from one area to another. New animals going to a new area are exposed to pathogens that they may be naive to, and then the population that you're taking them to may be naive populations. So for each one of these, we go through a disease risk analysis. And as Mike mentioned, all of these that are on the list here, we're not going to do all at the same time. Depending on the situation, the resources, and so on, we'll pick those, and then on a case-by-case basis, we will do a risk analysis for each one of those and determine what makes sense and what's likely to have the greatest chance of success. And then just one other question, I don't recall all of them, but just with respect to going in early and doing some predation management in areas that we're going to be augmenting these sheep. Obviously, we rely a lot on information from our area biologists, and we do recognize that mountain lions, for example, can on occasion pose a concern for newly augmented herds, and we agree that predation management in those cases is a good idea. One thing I will say that is an issue is just the logistics of performing this predation management. As it is, we, working with Wildlife Services with their cuts to their staffing, we're unable to even do probably half of what we would like to do. And our discussions with Wildlife Services have indicated that just with 2 lion hunters in the whole state, there's no ways that they could deal with all of our situations. So we have to look at each one individually, determine what the risks are, and then really, as Mike had mentioned, we want the biggest bang for our buck. So in an area where we really do consider it a concern, we would focus our energies on that. So I'll turn it back to Mike. Thank you.
Let me get back to Commissioner Capro's questions. We've had predator management in the Virginia mountains since the last release, and Chris Hampson knows better than I, but I believe we've taken at least 5 lions out of there.
7.
Is it 7? Through Wildlife Services, and It is unfortunate to hear we may not have as much liberty to use wildlife services where we want them and when we want them. And there's no doubt that over half our bighorns deal with mountain lions, and it is a very costly program. It is one of the most successful programs in the West, but we don't want to waste our money. I totally agree, and we also want to see every opportunity given to those few sheep to succeed, get established, learn where they want to be, learn where the water is, learn the best way to get to their water and the best exit to keep nimble and keep away from those predators. And at some point, we have to, just like our children, we got to let them out in the big world, and sometimes it doesn't always work. But we are, I think, doing our best to take the resources that we have available, the areas that we know we've got lion concerns, or even, down south we've got bobcats, and making some judgment calls of where to put that wildlife service effort, make sure that herd gets established. We know we're going to lose one or two, but we can hopefully have that population with the majority of them get established. And certainly, Virginia mountains is an issue, and although so far things are looking good, we've got a good land recruitment. So we're just going to have to be vigilant on that one. The Delamars, I think a lot of us as biologists, it's not physics. It's there's a lot of unknowns to us. The Delamars, and I think I wrote this in, or Mike Scott did. And right now, with some of the fires that occurred in '05 and then even before that, we may be looking at 400 square miles of bighorn habitat. Probably in the top 5 in terms of total single bighorn sheep habitat that's contiguous. It's huge. We're, at the same time, Wildlife Services is struggling to do some of their work. We struggle to survey everything. We'd love to survey hours upon hours with our helicopter, everything, but we can't. And I think we are long overdue to get a very extensive survey in the Delamars. We haven't done one. We've got trail cameras up, and with our limited survey, we see animals that were released in the early 2000s that are still alive out there. So we know that not all of them have been eaten. We do know that we have a lion issue. We do know that it's great bobcat habitat, and bobcats, we were the ones that documented it probably before many other states, if any, that they can take a 100-pound ewe down. So we're, with that big of an area, it's what we call our release valve. And again, I need more time to get into our populations, our densities, our carrying capacities, and the risks and costs and benefits of leaving populations build, taking some away, and moving them somewhere. And I think a lot of us in the agency have still a lot of faith in the Delamars. It's great habitat. You talk to a lot of the fraternity members who've been up there building water developments, slaving away. It's great habitat. I think there's a threshold on any mountain range that if you can get that population above that threshold, you're gonna have that population moving forward. It's such a large area, that threshold is far beyond some of our normal areas that are 50 to 60 square miles, where 100 sheep is a good core, and they can withstand issues. And our plans, if we get all the issues dealt with on the ghost shoots, that's stated in our summary there, we would go to the East Humboldts probably for source stock.
Thank you, Chairman Lent. I had asked Pat Cummins, our Southern Area biologist, some questions on Grafton. He provided me with a couple of documents that I think answer a lot of Commissioner Rain's questions with regard to the selection of these areas, and specifically the livestock operators that are on those areas. Now, I realize that document was dated, I think, in the 90s, maybe early 90s, or maybe even late 80s. I can't remember exactly what the date on the document was, but it was very clear to me that they considered all factors, including livestock operators, and obviously trying to avoid areas where there are sheep, domestic sheep. And so that might be a good document that you could maybe get out to the commission so they can see what I read, or I could forward in the email that has those PDF documents on it. But I felt that it was a very good, background as to the entire program. He sent it to me with regard to Grafton, but it had it basically covered all the areas, and it was very very helpful to see how the department chose these areas.
Yeah, that's an old assessment. Some of our senior biologists were young and spry then, doing those walk in the mountains, and so it was more of a habitat assessment. It wasn't necessarily, interacting with the users out there. And Grafton, as we state, we have to still sit down with the BLM and look at a trailing route that's nearby, and that is still a concern. So we'll be identifying that and working with the permittee to see if we can address our risks of potential disease transmission. But
I'll go on record that the permittee on the west side of Grafton is for desert bighorn sheep, and on
I bet you he is. That's great to hear. California bighorn, we're looking to augment the Jackson Mountains and specifically the Martin Creek drainage in the Santa Rosas. We'll probably be doing the Jacksons, we hope, this winter, and maybe the Martin Creek next year. Questions on the California bighorn? The ghost shoots, the Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep. I mean, if there's an animal that people are dying to see more of in this state, that's it. We can't do enough for you guys. My gosh, and when you see on 195 Rocky Ram checked in, it tells you why. We are continuing to look for opportunities to establish more Rocky Mountain bighorn sheep habitats because of some of the risks involved and issues out there, land users and other people out there that we respect. We haven't found a spot that we're comfortable with. The ghost shoots is an interesting one, and I won't get into great detail, but a permittee who actually lives in Utah came to the BLM and said, I run sheep and cattle, and I know there's potential for disease transmission between domestics and wild sheep, and I'd like to, for my own benefit, switch some of my permit to cattle, and I hear that it could be a benefit to allowing Nevada Department of Wildlife to restore a bighorn herd. And so we all got excited about that. That process is ongoing, and as this summary sheet states, we are not going to release Rockies into the ghost shoots until that plan is approved by the BLM and the permittee, which provides us assurances and separation from our wild sheep and our domestic, and the domestic sheep that he would probably still run for a few more years. But anytime and I'm saying this because I truly believe in it, and our agency believes in it. Anytime we can find an opportunity to work on a win-win situation with the livestock industry, we're excited about it. We're not going to cave in and do something stupid that could cause us to second guess things. But at the same time, I'm going to get into this winter. We have more sheep than anyone else except Alaska, wild sheep. And we are looking harder and harder at our source stocks that are reaching their carrying capacity. The densities that science tells us are risky in terms of having an internal or innate catastrophic epizootic occur in those bighorn. We're constantly looking at places where we can find a home for these sheep. And we're willing to take the risk, and we have in the past, not many times, but we're willing to take more risk at a potential die-off of, say, 10 sheep than losing an entire herd of 100 or 200. And that risk is on us. And we're not out to stake anyone on the cross if we lose sheep in that situation. We're going to be clear that that risk is our risk. If we have a disease event, then we'll take it on the chin. So we're going to be, I think, discussing some of those situations and opportunities in the future. And then the pronghorn antelope. We've got some releases identified down in Lincoln County, pending some water development.
I had a couple questions on sheep. Do you think predators are a part of habitat? No, it's on. Do you think predation is a part of habitat definition?
Is predators part of the definition of habitat? I would say no. But just like anything else in the world we work in, there's interactions and things are intertwined. So one doesn't work without the other, one doesn't influence the other. They both influence each other. But habitat is food, water, and cover to me.
The other question I have, Mike, do you think that you should survey an area for lions before you transplant like you do for habitat? Because you wouldn't transplant sheep if there was no habitat. So why wouldn't you survey an area before you did a transplant for lions and habitat?
Well, in the areas that our biologists are concerned about, we do assessments. We get people's opinions. We talk to houndsmen, and we see, what have you ran into? We look at harvest records, sportsman harvest records. So there is some work done, and if there's a question, we probably will be looking to do some predator control once we know where those sheep have established. But there is an evaluation.
If you put sheep in an area where there's lions, I think there's a lot of documentation. Lions can change the behavior of sheep, enforcement areas where they're not naturally want to go. So where like we did this at Mount Grant before, we've lost all of the sheep in there, but can't lions change the whole behavior of any animal if in an area, move them to a higher, lower elevation, or where they wouldn't naturally go?
Yeah, I mean, it's likely occurred with the Sierra Nevada bighorns. Some of their winter range that they'd like to use is it's got lions, and so they prefer to stay away from them.
The point I was making is you wait till you put the sheep in there and there's lions in there, you might have a lower survival rate, and because you're going to push the sheep to where they might not normally go. And if you do it after the fact, the predator control.
I mean, lions they're out there, we know that. We would have not even tried to start bighorn restoration if we didn't understand the dynamics of predator-prey relationships. But we do what we can with the money we have. And we are the most successful state in the West in restoring bighorn sheep. Now, Utah will come tomorrow and they might say they're second. And I think they are, but they're not as good as we are. So we have, I know your concerns, but look at the numbers. Not every sheep herd dies from lions. It's going to happen occasionally, but we've got so many successes, it's not even funny.
Any other comments before I open up to the public? Commissioner Morai?
One thing I'd like to say about the reintroduction in the Go Shoot Mountains is I had an opportunity to talk to the permittee over there that that Mike referred to, and he was on board from the beginning on this plan and how they were going to go about it, contingent upon a number of different factors. And this is an example, I believe, of the department working with the permittee and the landowner to establish common goals and to try to work out some of the problems that may arise and try to foresee these problems ahead of time. So I'd just like to commend the department on this type of a situation, because I think this is the way we need to go about it when we're going to do these reintroductions.
Hearing none, I'll turn it over for public comment now. Step on up. We've got Castanelli.
For the record, Tom Castanelli with Humboldt County. First of all, I think we need to look at this whole program. We're kind of picking at this program. What a great program. I got involved with the county board at the start of this when we started putting sheep in Humboldt County. And look at what we have now. We had nothing. We've got all these Californians. There's places that have gone down, and we have access to places where we've introduced them to replenish these. The Santa Rosas, Martin Basin, that herd's moving off a little bit into Oregon, and we're having a few problems there. But look at the sheep we have scattered around the state, or the northern part of the state, to harvest from and move. Our biologists, the department, I think they need a lot of commendation for what they've done with our transplant program. Look at our herds. We've got 3 species of sheep. What other state has that? None. Nevada does, and it's all because of this transplant program that they did. Humboldt County, whenever one of these comes through, we look it over, and it's, after being involved with it like we have up there, it's no-brainer. We just accept them. We look at them. We know what's happened with the landowners. That's why I was involved. I was representing the ranchers, and we had some concerns, and it's gone fairly smoothly. You know, we have some big sheep concerns up there with dufferinas, and we've had a real smooth program run with those Californians through all of Humboldt County, and now they're in Washoe County, Elko County. They've scattered greatly through there. And I just, like I said, I can't say enough about what this state's done. Look at our elk herds, how we've moved them around. Just think back what it was like 20 years ago, and look today. And today, we're transplanting. We're going to have some losses. We're transplanting in marginal areas now. We're at the end of where we can put these animals. Californians to deserts, we're getting out there, and we're going to have some losses, but we're going to have some that make it too. And every transplant we put into this state that makes it is tenfold what we lose, because you have them to pick from on another day, where maybe down here, maybe the McCulloughs. You know, someday the McCulloughs may be bearing a sheep, and we've got all these other areas that have desert sheep that we've planted into, and we'll have a source for them. When it comes to Utah, we recommended, I'm going to bring it up today because I'm here, so I won't have to tomorrow. We're 100% behind that. We've got the Californians that come into this state, and the Rockies. They didn't come from Nevada. The goats, they didn't come from Nevada. And the more we put out there in the United States, and everybody gets on this program, you're going to see our wildlife throughout the West expand. And I think it's an excellent program, and I'd like to thank all the department and our biologists. A lot of this, we don't talk about the biologists. The local biologists are just as much part of this as the heads here. They're out there, they don't want their programs to fail. They're out there looking for spots to put these animals where they will expand. And I think they do a great job too. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Jolinda Taberti. I'm representing the Fraternity of the Desert Bighorn. We also encourage development of this program and encourage all the sheep releases. One example is in the River Mountains in Boulder City, we really encourage you to be proactive. We feel that there's going to be some disease out there because there is too many sheep out there, and that also we're really concerned at the fraternity about sheep interaction with people. We think that there's going to be a child hurt here pretty soon, and we need some of those rams taken out of there, and we need some more sheep taken out of there. And we've got to be very cognizant. Now those sheep are all named by every citizen out there in Boulder City, and they're their pets out there. So we've got to leave some sheep, and we have to work with them, but we have to be proactive until we're going to get in trouble out there. And we feel that this type of plan has to be in process, so when we do get to take those sheep out of there, we have a place for them to go. I'd like to, Commissioner Capurro, talk to you about the Del Mars. The sheep range used to be Nevada's place of glory, and there was some big sheep out there. I've been out there personally in the last 4 years. I've hunted every inch of it, and it's a shame that the sheep haven't come back, but I'll tell you what, they are coming back, and they're doing better. With that, this summer and this fall, I've been all over the Del Mar range, and the Del Mar range is absolutely beautiful now. They had some major fires go through. They burned 1 million acres in the Del Mars. It's come back. It's rained all spring this year. The flora and fauna is really coming back, and the Del Mars, in my opinion, could be the next sheep range of the old days. And we encourage, for some reason, I want to get it online, that there's a lot of people in the north that feel like the Del Mars aren't the place. And maybe they're not, but times change, and this burn we're talking 1 million acres in just the burn. And if you see it now, it's coming back. The fraternity has built guzzlers basically on the west side of that range. On the east side of the range, there's Bishop Springs, there's Willow Creek, there is Riggs Springs. These things are all doing well. They're all full. And we've got, as Mike said, we've got trail cameras on a lot of these, and you can't believe the big bucks that are there now. I mean, we felt we've done a lot for deer in that area, and they're really, really good. The deer are doing really well. We've seen more big bucks in that area this year than ever before. So we encourage you to have this release plan, especially in the Del Mars, because we're trying to think of a place to put the Boulder City sheep. If we've got other places, that's fine. Put them wherever you want to put them. But let's have the Del Mars as that place where we can dump 50 sheep in a heartbeat. You could dump 50 sheep out there tomorrow, and that land could absorb it, and it's ready to go. It will be ready to go for the next 10 years. That whole area out there is pretty good looking country now, and it has a dramatic change. It was a lot of pinyon juniper. It's all gone, and the pinyon juniper's not coming back, and it's too arid out there. It'll come back, but it's going to be 100 years, not in the next 10 or 15 years. It's going to be beautiful country out there. So I do encourage the Del Mars. I don't know what happened, why people think the Del Mars are a real controversial area, but I encourage any trips out there or anything, because I personally have been from one end to the other. It's beautiful out there. So we do encourage this plan for all the sheep items. The fraternity does. We especially the Del Mars, and we do encourage some capturing out of Boulder City, because we really feel the problem's coming up. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? If not, I'll bring it back to the commission for any thoughts. Commissioner Capurro?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, kind of a clarification. I don't have any problem with the releases into the Delamars as per se. What I'm concerned about, and even in the evaluation here, is that there's an ongoing protection project there now. So that's an admission that you got a lion problem there. And I think that what I'm trying to say to you is I'm absolutely against putting an augmentation in where I know that because of that sort of predation problem, that half of them aren't going to make it through the winter. We've got areas like that have happened. We need to get the biggest bang for the buck. And to me, that includes predator management before you go in and augment. And as to your remarks about the river park, I've had people say there's more sheep in that park there than there are in the city. And some big rams there that people have identified. But you're right, they've got them named, so you're going to have to take them at night if you take them.
One thing about the lions, I'm all for lion hunting. I'm all for taking some lions out of that area. If we want to keep spending a few bucks to do it, we're all for it. We have been with Jim Bueller out there. He's the government trapper out there, and I'll tell you what, he's fed up of being out there. He says on the west side, where our guzzlers have been, he's having some tough time getting lions out there. Shad Leader, who is the guide on the other side, he says we're nuts. We've killed every lion out there. And I'm on your side. Trust me, I'm on your side. We don't want to feed sheep to lions. We're not in that business. But as soon as I've talked to Bueller and as soon as I talked to Shad Leader, we were out there spotlighting, and on the very east side, right by Caliani, and going down the Rainbow Canyon, we saw a lion on the east side at night, middle of the night. So now we told the boys in Caliani we think the problem might have been taken care of, but you're right. I mean, there can be lions out there, and I do agree with Mike that we could try to take out every lion out there, and in that area, that's such big country that you're going to get some strays coming in there. But we're not opposed to lion hunting in that area, and we're not opposed to taking some out. And I just want to let you know, though, we feel that there's not a huge lion problem in the Del Mars, and that Bueller and the boys out there riding for a month at a time has helped. So we encourage it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'm very much a supporter of transplants whenever and wherever it is reasonable to think that they will expand into a strong, healthy population. However, we really need to take a look at all transplants because they're expensive, they're dangerous, they take a lot of effort, and so we really need to think out the management of them. So there's a couple things I look at this summary that seem to appear to be inconsistencies that, probably a little more information might clarify. Habitat is excellent in most of these, which would be a good prerequisite. Predator evaluations in many of them show that there's not really a problem, and yet many of them have been augmented and augmented over the years. We've changed no conditions, so nothing has changed. How can we reasonably expect that the results of a new additional augmentation will have a different result? And, it brings back, thoughts of, wait a minute, if you do the same thing over and over again, don't change anything, you expect different result, that's nuts. So what are we changing in these areas since these previous augmentations? And perhaps that's something that can be brought up when this plan comes back before the commission as an action item. So it's going to come back in December, because our policy is to have this, the big game release has to be approved by the commission. So hopefully those can be addressed when they do come back before this commission for approval in, I would assume, December. Thank you.
Any? Commissioner Howell?
I think we're all on the same page here, more or less, with the augmentation. But some of the areas that have been problems in the past, like Grafton, for instance, my example, it seems to me like a serious predator control program prior to the introduction would make a lot more sense. It's an area where, like Mr. Cox said, he don't know where they're going to go, but let's give them a chance to find out where they want to go. If you've got lions up there now, which everybody knows there is, let's give them a chance. And instead of putting 30, let's maybe put 100 up there. We find out we got it cleared out.
Okay. This was a informational item. Let's go on to the next one then, which is the Silver State Tag update. Bob Hoyt.